When it comes to movies, books, video games, and much more, horror has always been my favorite genre, and I'm tired of hearing people say it sucks. I mean, even scientifically speaking, it's enjoyable. Like, besides the obvious fear response, producing endorphins, which can be a sort of natural high, other feel good chemicals that can also come into play with fear, like dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. But all of those can be found in other genres as well. What for me truly makes the beauty of horror is its creativity and depth. No other genre has the creativity and depth found in horror. Themes, topics, horror will find a way to address what's happening around us and inside us at a deeper level, while using the most creative metaphors. You don't seem convinced. Look, horror is a big genre with lots of subcategories and the quality varies a lot. I'm not gonna tell you that every person likes horror because of the themes and creativity. Some people watch them because they like watching something with a lot of dumb dialogues and stupid violence they can turn their brains off to and stay surface level, which is completely valid. Look, I'm not gonna tell you how you should enjoy your free time, but I'm here to talk about a deeper and for me much more interesting vision of horror. So I made this video to tell you all the reasons horror is such an incredible genre and give you examples and recommendations if you're interested in going further into it. If you like this video, then you can also send it to a friend to convince them that horror isn't a shallow genre filled with jump scares some people think it is. To really explain what makes horror so good to me, I first need to explain what I mean when I'm talking about horror. For me, there are two main subcategories of horror: horror and terror. There's always a bit of horror in terror, and always a bit of terror in horror, but there are very different ways of creating and setting up a story and atmosphere. Wikipedia describes the difference between horror and terror as: horror is the feeling of revulsion that usually follows a frightening sight, sound, or otherwise experience. By contrast, terror is usually described as the feeling of dread and anticipation that precedes the horrifying experience. To put it in simpler terms, horror is when you see something scary, and terror is when you are on the edge expecting to see something scary. A horror story always has a bit of both, but tends to lean more towards one rather than the other. The reason for this is that if a movie, for example, only had horror elements with a lot of visible monsters, you would lack the buildup of tension that comes with terror, thus making it more of a monster-filled action gory movie without too much scare. If you go the opposite way with only terror and no horror, you create a movie with a lot of tension, creepy things and build-up, but without the release of tension that comes with horror and actually seeing the scary monster. This is scary, but the build-up without any release becomes too frustrating for most people. Think of it like a song or a melody that constantly feels like it's gonna have a beat drop, but never does. So the thing that creates the fear is the terror, and the thing that creates the scare is the horror. Some examples to illustrate these would be low terror and high horror. You get Cabin in the Woods. That is more akin to a homage to slasher films with a lot of comedy and really great monster design, but not a lot of tension or horror. On the opposite side of the spectrum, with very low horror but very high terror, you get Skinamarink, a movie about a small brother and sister who wake up during the night to discover that they cannot find their father, while we slowly come to the realization that they are being trapped and toyed with in their house by a demon. But the movie never shows the demon, and mostly shows the house or TV displaying old children's cartoons as meta for what's happening, and we even see very little of the characters and mostly follow them through sound. The movie isn't for everyone, as it shows almost nothing of what's happening and just leaves it to the imagination with the sound. And even at the end of the movie, when we see the silhouette of the demon tormenting the boy, we expect it to attack or do something scary, but just stays there, hauntingly, which makes the tension and anticipation stay even after the movie is over. And without the release of tension of a true scare, the viewer can be left with a lot of build-up and feel frustrated. On the side of video games, we have Subnautica, with almost non-existent horror, but a medium terror. Subnautica is not a primarily horror game. The game is more about underwater exploration, scavenging for materials, crafting better diving gear, equipment and bases. Every enemy in the game can be called intimidating, but not horrifying. There are some creatures that are clearly made to be scary, but they're still designed with a non-horror aesthetic. Despite all this, Subnautica is still considered by many to be a horror game and one of the best games at portraying thalassophobia, or fear of the deep bodies of water. Why? Well, the key lies in the atmosphere, or in this case, terror. The game does something really clever. It makes the sound and groans of its dangerous creatures hearable from very far away, which makes the player always think the danger is much closer than it actually is. An alien planet is already a place full of unknowns and dangers, so when you're exploring, you're generally in high alert. And when you hear a weird alien scream that sounds so unnatural to our human ears from a big monster that can destroy your submarine, your first instinct is to run away and be scared. All this without even mentioning the map design, and it's sometimes tight and claustrophobic and sometimes huge megalophobic spaces. By the way, shameless plug, but if you want to know more about the game or other great scary games about thalassophobia, you can check out my other video linked in the description. Some other quick examples would be the first Alien movie, which is high terror and high horror, but Alien vs Predator is high horror, very low terror. Saw 1 is high horror, medium terror. Iron Lung is high terror, low horror. Resident Evil series varies from high horror, medium terror, to medium horror, no terror, to high terror, medium horror. Dead Space 1 is high horror, high terror. Dead Space 2 is high horror, medium terror. And Dead Space 3 is medium horror, low terror. The Forest is medium horror and medium terror, etc, etc, etc. I've grown tired of saying horror and terror and horror and terror. Well, all of this to say is that what people call horror is just one half of a coin. And I personally find that the bigger emphasis on terror with a smaller amount of horror to keep tensions high, but also get to release the tension at the right times and also see interesting monster and design ideas, is much better. Now that we've talked about what the horror genre is composed of, we can start talking about why I and many others enjoy it so much. I mean, you could say there's the thrill of it. Some people just like to watch something scary because of the adrenaline. There's the fun of it. Some people like to watch them because they think they're silly, non-serious movies and want to have a good time. There's the distraction of it. Some people just want to watch them, to be scared of something not real, and forget their own deep-rooted fears, which constantly put pressure on them, and they cannot find a way to get better, no matter how much they try, and it's really wearing them down. There's a silly of it. A lot of horror movies have a silly or goofy element to them, and especially fun when watched in a group, which creates a less scary environment, and it becomes much easier to watch for even the most sensitive people, thanks to the funny flaws or silly moments. But these are all personal and subjective things. What I want to talk about is what makes the horror genre so special and superior to all other genres, in my objective opinion. Can you guess what it is? What makes horror as an art form superior to other genres in our modern culture and society? Raw creativity. Creativity is what makes horror for me the best genre. But you'll tell me, oh WellFell, other genres are creative too. And to that I'll say yes, absolutely. But there are a few big differences for horror that give it that edge over other genres. First of all, an obvious one is, horror is inherently much less likely to be censored. In today's age, when every company tries to appeal to the biggest audience possible, horror stands out as a genre that appeals to a, in comparison, much smaller demographic of horror enthusiasts. The advantage of that is that people who like horror really like horror, so it is generally a malpractice to try to make a horror movie milder for a larger audience, because it might make your already existing audience not like it, while people who weren't interested in horror in the first place still aren't interested. With it not having as big of an audience as other milder audiences that can be marketed to much younger demographics, and being inherently very hard to censor or control due to high risk of audience loss, it is generally avoided by big corporations, and thus make it so that horror movies are generally not tied down by corporate overlords trying to maximize profits while taking as much creativity out of the project. This, tied to the fact that historically, horror movies have always been much less costly to produce, it is the perfect genre for creativity and individual artistic expression to flourish. And if you're thinking that without the backing of huge corporations, the movie will look cheap, then worry not. Look at these movies with low budgets on film standards that look incredible. Since terror also demands that the monster or scary thing not be shown too often to not lose the fear of the unknown part, it's also very practical to save money, which contributes to making the film easier and less costly to make, which also makes the film more scary, thus better. The loop that feeds itself to become better and better and better. And second of all, when I said raw creativity, I wasn't just talking about not being bogged down by big corporations while making a low to mid-budget horror film. It's much more. Horror, by its nature of not needing much to be scary, is a very easily accessible genre to all types of art form, from film to video games to animations to sound design, etc. This means that it is a genre in which a lot of independent or indie creators flourish and thrive. You might think that if it's so easily accessible and filled with indie creators, that it's all small niche works, but you couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I'm willing to bet you, yes you, the person watching this video at home in your bed at night, know at least one of the following increasingly more popular indie horror projects born from a single person or a very small number of creators uploading their ideas on the internet. Even those of you unfamiliar with horror will recognize at least one: Gemini Home Entertainment, Lost in Vivo, Vita Carnes, Iron Lung, The Mandela Catalog, The Backrooms, Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, Amnesia, Doki Doki Literature Club, the SCP Foundation, Five Nights at Freddy's. These are all games or YouTube series or other internet phenomena that have become wildly successful because of their qualities, but also made by one person or a very small team. All of these works experiment with different types of horror storytelling. For example, Gemini Home Entertainment, Vita Carnes, and Mandela Catalog are horror series on YouTube that tell their stories through mostly short YouTube videos that slowly reveal the horrifying occurrences or monsters living in their universes and how they torment their victims while letting the viewers slowly piece together the intricacies of their worlds. These titles are part of what we call analog horror, which has exploded in popularity in the last few years thanks to the success of series like these. Iron Lung, Slenderman, and Five Nights at Freddy's are games made by one person or a small team with a very low budget, but their creativity in the way they deliver their story and horror, and the way they tie their game mechanics in an original and creative way that have all become so popular, there have been many who have gotten inspired by them or tried to copy them and made so many more interesting titles. What I'm trying to get at here is that horror is now more than ever filled with a huge number of creators that are restricted only by the limits of their imagination and produce incredible works that then go on to influence others to create even more. Oh no, it's a self-sustaining monster. But you may say, creativity and ingenuity and the intricacies of horror are all well and good. But what truly makes people enjoy horror at their core? What in our minds makes us like the feeling of being scared? One reason we consume horror is to experience stimulation. Yes, stimulation! Do you like going to the amusement park? Do you enjoy those fast rides and the feeling of being tossed around in a big machine? Or bumping into other people with your car and suddenly jumping because someone bumped into you and you didn't see it coming? Horror is very similar to those thrills. Just like bumper cars or a roller coaster ride, you start a bit slow at first and then build up anticipation for the thrill that will come soon, so everyone can get mentally ready. For bumper cars, it's when you're first seated and you're waiting for everyone to sit down, so you mentally prepare in advance who you're gonna bump into and excitedly wait for the bell that indicates the beginning of the game. For the roller coaster, it is when you first see the roller coaster from afar and see the people screaming and anticipate getting in, then actually getting in the ride, and then slowly going up the first hill, all builds up anticipation and thrill even though you haven't even started the exciting descent yet. Just from that first part, I'm sure you can see the similarities between those fun carnival thrills and horror content. So I'll speed up the next parts a bit. When the bumper car starts, and when the roller coaster finally starts to go down, both accelerate, and you get the actual thrill of the attraction, and thus the actual scary part of the horror after the setup and build up. And finally, when the music dies down, the roller coaster slows down, you're still in the thrill and the emotion of it. And so, even when the attraction stops, the rush of the adrenaline and the excitement and the joy of the ride still stays with you for a while after you get off. The same can be said of a good horror media, be it movie, game, or a book. Even when it ends, it still leaves you with the emotion of what you just experienced, and makes you question what you watched and what's around you. You might be wondering why I even said all that. Why compare carnival rides to horror? Well, it's because people tend to elevate horror to atrocious things about violence and scared things, and it makes you unable to sleep and this and that. But in the end, horror is just another form of entertainment meant to make you feel the thrill of strong emotions. Sure, it's not for everyone, but that doesn't make it a monster. After all this, if you take just one thing home with you, is that horror is an incredibly independent creator-friendly art form that uses its kind of out-of-place and taboo image to share incredible stories that touch upon themes that can't be talked about in big productions by fear of losing revenue. That the horror most people know is just one side of the coin, and all of the interesting parts of the media come from balancing terror and horror to create the type of story you want to share. And that in the end, horror is just another genre of entertainment to sit back and enjoy. Well, this has been fun and WellFell. So, see you next time when I'll talk more in the actual spirit of the horror genre. But I had to get this video out of my system. Send this to someone who doesn't like horror. You never know, maybe they'll change their mind or give it a try. Leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe. Cause I am not in the horror video business. I am in the horror empire business. And I don't plan on stopping anytime soon.